Trackhouse racing will play a major factor in NASCAR's silly season for 2026, and could we see Cleetus McFarland in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series in 2026? What's going on, guys? This is Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got some NASCAR and other motorsports story discussed today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just show them those really quickly. We're going to start by talking about Team Penske. As was reported by the NASCAR Insights account earlier this evening, that with Ryan Blaney picking up the win at National Super Speedway, he picked up Team Penske's 153rd win in the NASCAR Cup Series. They are now tied 4th all-time on NASCAR Cup competition for teams. They have tied Junior Johnson's organization. The next 3 teams after that, of course, are Richard Petty's organization, Hendrick Motorsports, and Joe Gibbs Racing. To join the elite class of that and be tied 4th all-time is really impressive. I don't know when they're going to get to 200 wins. I think Ryan Blaney's got a lot of wins in him that I think he could definitely go and get victories. Nonetheless, congratulations Team Penske on hitting another record and having 153 wins in NASCAR Cup competition. And now we're going to head jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the National Super Speedway. As it was announced earlier this evening before the NASCAR Cup Series race took place, that the NASCAR Cup Series race from the track has officially sold out. This is the second or third straight week of sellouts for the NASCAR Cup Series. Of course, the Coca-Cola 600 has sold out early in the year. This has been a little bit up and down when it comes to prior races so far this year, but nonetheless, I think this is a really, really big deal, and I think it's pretty good to see that the race once again has sold out. A lot of people showed up. There was a lot of energy and a lot of excitement in the crowd especially. I think this is still a very, very big deal, and nonetheless really awesome to see that the National Super Speedway track sold out once again. Really exciting and really awesome stuff overall. In my honest opinion, really great stuff. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Keelan Harvick. Now, if you watched the Cars Tour West race last night, you saw that Keelan Harvick and Kevin Harvick competed against each other. And throughout most of the race, actually Keelan and Kevin put on a really good show and really good battle. But unfortunately, near the end of the race, Kevin Harvick was dumped by, I believe it was a guy named Johnny Gomez, I'm pretty sure. He dumped him near the end of the race and Kevin got dumped in the event. Well, Keelan Harvick was able to get out a pretty big lead in front of the rest of the field on the final restart, and he would come off the corner and put up a dominating win and would pick up his first ever win in the Cars Tour West Series and like his 34th win altogether in the Cars Tour as well. Huge congratulations to Keelan Harvick on beating his father. There is a lot of hype around this young driver. Keelan has won some races, especially as of recently, and he's winning pretty much everything he is getting behind the wheel of. And you think about this the next couple of years, there's a very good chance and possibly that we are going to see Keelan Harvick in NASCAR competition. So to see him continuing to do what he's doing, I think is really impressive. I think it's really awesome stuff and great to see. And congratulations once again to Keelan Harvick on winning the Cars Tour West Series. I think that's exciting, and I think that's really awesome to see him picking up another win in that series, and for his first win in the series, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the in-season tournament. Now, of course, we had the qualifiers earlier tonight, but there are 4 drivers who will not be going into the qualifiers for the in-season tournament. These are the 4 drivers who did not make the top 32 in the standings. Shane Van Gisbergen, who is 33rd in the standings. Cole Custer in the 41 car for the Haas factory team. Riley Herbst in the 35 car for 2311. And then Cody Ware in the 51 car. Shane Van Gisbergen, Cole Custer, Riley Herbst were all tied, I believe, around 303 points. They are way down. They're only about 20 points behind Brad Keselowski, but they just missed out of getting in. It looked like Shane Van Gisbergen was actually going to beat Brad Keselowski tonight, but they made some bad calls on pit road and didn't make the best adjustments to stay up front. But I think for these guys, it's kind of a shame for Shane Van Gisbergen, mainly because SVG, I think he would have played a big factor in Mexico and would have played a major, major factor when we got to a track like Sonoma, for example, near the end of the year. So tough break for those guys, but the seeding is going to happen and the qualifiers are coming up. And unfortunately, these 4 drivers will not get the chance and opportunity to go for that. Really tough break for all these guys that did not make it this year. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Spanish Grand Prix. Before the IndyCar race took place at Detroit and tonight's race at National Super Speedway took place, you had the Spanish Grand Prix in Formula 1. And this race really was kind of quiet in the beginning. Oscar Piastri got a really good start and got a really big lead, and he would dominate the early portion of the race. But Max Verstappen, early in the event, they were playing a really interesting strategy, and they actually got ahead of the McLarens early in the event, but they lost a lot of track position position. But then there was a caution and safety car that came out with around 10 laps to go in the race. And for some reason, Red Bull played some really bad strategies and put Max Verstappen in a vulnerable position. And Max dropped back quite a bit. And there was some controversy at this point where Oscar Piastri pulled away. And then, of course, we saw Max Verstappen kind of brake check George Russell, which I really don't know why he had to give the position back in the first place. But he kind of brake checked George Russell. He did get a penalty and dropped back to 10th place. There will be no more investigation. If he does get one more point penalty, he will miss a race, so he needs to calm down on that front. I thought that was really unacceptable for Max Verstappen. I get his frustration. I think there's a lot of justification on the frustration, but some of it was also unacceptable. But nonetheless, going back to Oscar Piastri, won the race. Congratulations to him on picking up the win. I think it's a well-earned win and a well-deserved victory. He did what he needed to do, got the victory done. Like I said, congratulations to him on picking up the win and getting another win in Formula One and continuing to extend his lead in the Formula One Championship at this particular moment. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Detroit Grand Prix. Before the NASCAR Cup Series race took place at National Superspeedway, you had the Detroit Grand Prix that took place. And this race was very, very chaotic. Now, Kyle Kirkwood would get a fantastic start early in the race, got by Colton Herta early in the event, and he would take control of this race early. But there would be a lot of strategy happening. You had some guys that were on the softer tires, and the guys on the softer tires like Alex Palou, Kyle Kirkwood, Colton Herta, they would all come down pit road early, and we saw drivers up front like Graham Rahal. There were multiple cautions that happened early in this race, and unlike last year, though, this race is not as chaotic, but there would be a couple really scary incidents near the end of this race. We had a really bad crash that took place between Felix Rosenqvist and Louis Foster. Luckily, both drivers are okay, and both will probably be able to race the upcoming race at Gateway in a week from now. Both have been medically cleared from the center, which is really good to hear. It was just a wild race overall, but Kyle Kirkwood would emerge. Alex Palou actually got put in the outside wall by David Malukas. You had a beef between Tony Kanaan and Scott McLaughlin on social media if you saw that. But I think for Kyle Kirkwood, going to him, he would pull out a pretty big lead over Santino Ferrucci, who got picked up his best ever finish in IndyCar. But Kyle Kirkwood to come off the corner and continue being one of only two guys that won and picks up his second win in 2025. And, of course, his fourth career IndyCar victory. Kyle Kirkwood has been dominant on the street courses. He's been really the only guy alive this year that's kept up with Alex Palou, and I think he's going to be the guy that's going to be contending with Alex Palou for the championship at the end of the season. So congratulations to Kyle Kirkwood on picking up the win. A well-earned and well-deserved victory for him. Dominated the race. It looked like maybe Colton Herta was going to have a chance to get to him, but he didn't get to him at the end. Nonetheless, congratulations, Kyle Kirkwood, on picking up the victory in Detroit. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the streets of Detroit once again. As was reported by Nathan Brown from the Indy Star earlier today, the Detroit Grand Prix will be staying on the streets of Detroit through 2028. According to Nathan Brown, it sounds like that the original plans to have the Renaissance Center reconstructed, it sounds like that is going to be off the cards currently at the moment, and there's been no proof funding for that to happen currently at this moment. I think when it comes to the streets of Detroit, I think the track is certainly very interesting, I will say, but I don't think the racing is that fantastic in all honesty. I think it was, in my opinion, though, it was the most interesting race we have had outside of the Indy 500 this year. It still was not the greatest and most exciting race overall, and I'm just not the biggest fan of the streets of Detroit because either you get a race that can be pretty boring, or you can get a race like today, for example, that was very chaotic. And I think there were definitely good moments in the race for sure today, and I think IMSA actually put on a pretty good show, but I think there's a lot of fans, and you heard Pat O'Ward early today, that was not very happy about the racing etiquette, and he really thinks we probably should go back to Belle Isle at this point, or I don't know, we should probably go to Michigan at this particular moment in time. Nonetheless, interesting, it sounds like Detroit's going to be on the schedule for the long-term and foreseeable future. I don't entirely agree with it being on the schedule for a long time, but nonetheless, that's a plan currently at the moment that it will be on the schedule for the next couple of years. I don't think it's going to put on the best racing overall, but nonetheless, it's probably going to be chaotic long-term, but nonetheless, it will be staying on the schedule, at least for the foreseeable future in IndyCar. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the top Indy 500 markets. As was reported by Adam Stern on Friday afternoon, that there's been some interesting updates in regards to the Indy 500 markets from this year that gained a lot. So according to him, the number one was Boston, with a 1.68 rating. New Orleans actually gained 3.12 on the rating. New York City got 1.85 increase in their rating. Dallas had 2.79 increase in their rating, and Hartford, Connecticut had 2.61 on the rating. one thing you're probably going to notice, a lot of East Coast races, and New Orleans would choose to host an IndyCar race. Obviously, there's not a lot of events happening up in the New England area currently at the moment for IndyCar, and I really do believe that there needs to be race happening in those areas. But I certainly think these top markets are certainly interesting for sure, and I do like seeing the markets continue to grow for IndyCar because I think IndyCar has grown in some ways, shapes, or forms in the last couple of years, and having a growth of IndyCar is very, very important for IndyCar stability because outside of the Indy 500, not many people do watch IndyCar in general. We're probably not going to get a great rating for the Detroit Grand Prix. So nonetheless, I think some of the numbers are certainly interesting, and I do like some of the numbers that I saw for some of those top markets, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about merch sales. As reported by Adam Stern on Friday evening, that we had some very interesting numbers in regards to the merch sales and increases in merch sales for 2025. Now, obviously, number one was NASCAR, and the NASCAR branding was number one. But let's talk about the top 7 drivers on the branding. Number one, and this surprised me, was Kyle Larson. Number 2 was Chase Elliott. Number 3 is Kyle Busch. Number 4, a little bit surprised as well, is Ross Chastain. Number 5 is Ryan Blaney. Number 6 is Joey Logano, and number 7 is Dale Jr. Now, I believe that Daniel Suarez is around 10th or 11th. Denny Hamlin, I think, is actually in the top 10 ahead of guys like Daniel Suarez, and I believe William Byron is also in the top 10, along with Dale Sr. as well. The big shock for me is Kyle Larson being number 1, because Chase Elliott has been the number 1 in merch sales for a very, very long time. I think it's clear as day that Kyle Larson may be starting to become more of a popular driver in the NASCAR sphere. There's been a lot of talk about this in recent years, where maybe that Kyle Larson has been closing in on that number. Yes, Kyle Larson does have a lot of young and very rabid fans from time to time, but you cannot deny that those merch sale numbers are a major, major deal. And when you see numbers like that and you're continuing to see growth for Kyle Larson, I don't think there's any denying it. Yes, Chase Elliott does have a lot of fans. I'm not going to deny it, and I'm not going to question that. But I think when it comes to numbers, you can clearly see that Kyle Larson has been gaining a huge number on that. I think it's going to continue growing. I don't think anything's going to change on that front. And I think for Kyle Larson being number 1, I think also Chastain being ahead of Blaney is a little bit surprising in some instances as well. But I think at the same token, at the same time, Chastain's been growing his popularity. You could tell, especially from the crowd earlier tonight that you heard during the Prime broadcast, that the crowd was really happy about Chastain. I think Kyle Larson is still a major deal, though, and I think him being number 1 is a big deal. Got a top 10 tonight in the Cup race, but he's number 1 on the merch sales, which isn't the most shocking thing, and which is a little shocking to see him ahead of Chase Elliott. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Cody Dennison, as he announced on Twitter, or X, on Friday evening that apparently he has an offer to run the NASCAR Xfinity Series race at Mexico City. He did not say which team he exactly is going to drive for at this event, but it sounds like he may have an offer to make his NASCAR Xfinity Series debut at Mexico City. Now, Cody Dennison, also known as Camelot on YouTube, who has a pretty big platform on social media. He also does a lot of drama content, I believe, on social media as well. But he's also a race car driver. And I know people have their thoughts on some of the things he has said on social media. I'm not going to get into that out of due respect. But he has had people that, do support him. He has a pretty big fan base overall. And I think Cody Dennison, say what you want to say, he has not been that awful in the Craftsman Truck Series. He has shown some decent speed out there and has put on some pretty decent performances, especially for the Ram trucks. And the Ram trucks this year, in all honesty, have not been very, very good this season. So to run at least a little bit better, I think that is a really, really big deal. Now, my best guess is probably like Joey Gase Motorsports at this point. I don't know if their schedule has been filled up at this entire moment. It's not going to be the 32 car for Jordan Anderson Racing, as I believe either Catherine Legge or Austin Green is going to be behind the wheel of that car. My best guess is Joey Gase Motorsports. I think they've got some races still available. It could be My Carmen Racing too, because My Carmen Racing I do expect to be down there for that event. So it's probably one of those two teams. Nonetheless, I'm interested to see what team Cody Dennison is going to drive for, but he will make some starts, and it sounds like he'll make a start in the NASCAR Xfinity Series potentially, and then get the funding set for the events. We'll see what funding he gets to run the races. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about IndyCar. As was reported by Nathan Brown from the Indy Star earlier this week, the IndyCar has intended to implement a partial scanning system of the cars in the near future. And it sounds like multiple teams are involved in this, including Aaron McLaren, Team Penske, which Roger Penske, of course, owns the series. I believe Dale Coyne Racing, AJ Foyt Racing, while other teams are in help to try to get this partial scanning system to come through. This is basically due in effect to what happened at the Indianapolis 500. Of course, there was a situation with Team Penske with the rear attenuators. There's also been some other cheating stuff that happened with Andretti Global with the 27 and the number 28 teams. And probably Colin Herta would have gotten not canceled, but basically would have probably been sent to the rear of the field had he been caught for the same situation. And then, of course, the 90 car for Callum Isla, which, of course, the Prema team, they, of course, got in trouble for something a little bit not the same, but they got in trouble and got sent to the rear of the field as well at the end of the race. They technically didn't get disqualified, but trust me, they were disqualified. I think IndyCar is looking at this and kind of something very similar to what NASCAR has with the Hawkeye system. Now, some people, and I think I do have to agree with this, are saying, why was this not implemented sooner? And I got to agree. I think this should have been implemented a hell of a lot sooner. I don't know why it took so long for this to get implemented, but I'm glad to see more now late than never something like this is getting implemented, because I think something like this should have been implemented quite a bit back, if we're going to be honest, on the IndyCar front. But with it being implemented now, I think it's going to help a lot in the inspection process. I think things are going to be caught a lot easier and a lot more quicker than they have been in the past. And I think having a system like this is very, very important for IndyCar when it comes to getting inspection done a little bit quicker. So I think that's something to watch for as well. But I think it's really good to see that they're finally going to implement something like this, because I think it's big for IndyCar to have something like this, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Corey Day. Now, Corey Day competed both in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series race in Nashville and in the Xfinity Series race at National Superspeedway as well. And this was all around the best weekend that Corey Day has had in his NASCAR career at this point. Corey Day ran really well in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series race, and he finished in a respectful 5th position. Meanwhile, in the NASCAR Xfinity Series race, it was a little bit of more of an issue in the race. Unfortunately, he did spin out early in the event, but unlike the other races where he spun out and never recovered, he actually recovered throughout the race and started moving up to the front of the field. Now, he might have had fresher tires. We're not really sure at this moment, but I think he did have fresh tires that did help him a little bit, but he still recovered to finish in 11th place. Now, we do have to remember that, yes, there's been a lot of Cup guys who have driven that number 1700 car with Kyle Larson, who's won this year, same with William Byron, who's won, and Chase Lee, Alex Bowman, who both put up respectful numbers this season. But I think for Corey Day to have a more complete weekend, yes, make a mistake, but to show a little bit more improvement and run better, that's what we want to see from Corey Day, is him get a lot better, because we all know that this season so far, it has been a pretty big struggle for the driver of the Hendrick Development Program. And the more experience he gets and the more he does improve, the better of a race car driver that I think he's going to be. I think he's a very talented driver. I think there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, but this weekend was a major step in the right direction. I really hope it does continue going forward. We can see that continue improving from Corey Day, because I think he's a talented driver. He showed a lot of skill this week. Did a pretty good job, ran up front, showed some good speed, had a really good weekend, definitely at National Superspeedway, and let's see if that continues throughout the rest of the season. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Mansfield Speedway. Now, many of you probably saw this on social media earlier today, but it was confirmed earlier today that Matt Tifft has officially purchased Mansfield Speedway, and the track is officially back. Now, for those of you who are NASCAR fans especially, you probably remember what Mansfield Speedway was. Mansfield Speedway is from the Ohio area, and they had races in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series from, I believe, around 2004 all the way up to 2008. And one of the most iconic truck moments happened at that track when Donnie Leah picked up his first and only career NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series win, driving number 71 TRG Group truck, which that team did win a Rolex 24 back in 2003 with Andy Lally driving for them. We saw that team get a really surprising victory. That track has been around in the area in recent years, but of course the track was abandoned, but now sounds like they're going to be bringing dirt racing back altogether. This is really exciting news to hear. A track like Mansfield Speedway, like I mentioned, that's been gone for a very, very long time. Seeing this track come back on the schedule and come back and do racing in general, I think that is a really, really big deal for basically anything. And if things can work out especially well, maybe down the road we see NASCAR go back there. or maybe see World of Outlaws race here, which I would have to think that they're going to try to convince World of Outlaws, and they're probably going to try to convince the High Limit Series to come help out as well. And I wouldn't also be surprised if Matt Colling, who does have a lot of funding, I wouldn't be surprised if Matt Colling does help this track get a little bit more up and running in the not-so-distant future. So I'm looking forward to this track coming back and having racing in a nutshell. I think this is a really, really big deal to have this track back, and I think it's going to be good for this community and good for the racing world to see a track like this back on the map. Excited to see and glad to see Mansell Speedway is back up and running. Really awesome stuff overall, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about hybrids. Now, hybrids have been a major conversation in the IndyCar world throughout the last year or so, and a lot of drivers have expressed their thoughts on hybrids, including mainly Pato O'Ward. Pato O'Ward says that the hybrids have brought zero benefit to IndyCar, and he imagines a world where there are no hybrids in IndyCar and wish that hybrids were not in these IndyCars currently at the moment. I do have to agree with Pato O'Ward in some instances because I'll be honest with the hybrid system. I think the racing, especially on the road courses and the street courses, has not been very, very good. Sure, I think we had a very interesting race in Detroit earlier today. But I think in general, when it comes to the racing product itself, the racing product has not been good. It has been very underwhelming, and I think that's an understatement. I think the racing just has not been that good overall. And I think if IndyCar wants to get better, they're going to have to make some changes to the racing product itself because, again, I just don't think the racing product in IndyCar right now is where it needs to be if it's going to have success long term. And I just think IndyCar, I remember when road and street courses used to be really good, especially when I was younger. And I get that even before the hybrid system, it wasn't amazing by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think that there are things that can absolutely be done to make the racing product a lot better. I'm just not sure right now with the current product of IndyCar if we're going to get that at this time. I think there's a lot more that has to be done and a lot of other big changes that are going to need to be happen for the racing to get a lot better in IndyCar. And I don't think it's just one simple change. I think a new car is going to be very important for that to happen. So if we can get a new car in IndyCar, I think that'd be a really big deal. So I think that'd play a major factor. And maybe you could have the hybrid system on there, maybe, but Honda's also very frustrated. So I don't know what you do at this particular moment, but I do truly think that there needs to be a new system or a new thing happening in a new car for the racing to get better. And I think the hybrid system probably should go, in my honest opinion, until they can get a fix. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Atlanta Motor Speedway. Now, many of you probably saw this on social media, especially on Reddit as well. But it seems like Atlanta Motor Speedway might be getting a new name change starting in the not-so-distant future. And it sounds like this track might be called Echo Park Speedway. There's been rumors and speculation over the course of the last couple months. We talked about this from an article that surfaced that it sounds like the Echo Park, which has been a major association, I believe Marcus Smith does have some ownership stakes in that company and that company itself as well. It sounds like that they're going to be buying up or at least having sponsorship rights over Atlanta Motor Speedway, according to what I have heard. Now, Echo Park, of course, pretty big company in that area. This is not the first time that we have seen a company buy in and take names. We all remember Lowe's Motor Speedway, which Charlotte used to be called Lowe's Motor Speedway from about, I believe, 2002 or 2003 up until around 2009 or 2010. It was called Lowe's Motor Speedway. You think about Sonoma, they were called Infineon Raceway from the early 2000s all the way up to the end of the 2000s. They were called Infineon Raceway. Currently, Gateway is known as Worldwide Technology Raceway. I got to be real and honest, I call Gateway more than anything else. I've been around this area my whole life, and I call Gateway more than anything else. I don't really call it Worldwide Technology Raceway. And there's other tracks like Phoenix that kind of have very similar dictations as well. To me, though, I think about this with Atlanta. I think it's interesting that Echo Park wants to spend the money. They're probably going to give them a lot of money going forward, and I think having somebody like Echo Park come in and spend money is very important, but I don't think it's going to really have a big impact on the racing itself, and I also think, I don't entirely agree with some of the things they're doing here, but I don't think it's the worst thing they've done when it comes to adding things to the sport, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Parker Reslov and Kyle Sieg. Now, if you watched the NASCAR Xfinity Series race at National Super Speedway, you saw the incident between Parker Reslov and Kyle Sieg. Now, at the end of stage number 1, they both were battling in the middle pack of the field like they've been generally throughout the whole entire year so far. Kyle Sieg was on the inside, Parker Reslov was on the outside. Going into turn number 3, Kyle Sieg seemed to be a little bit frustrated with Parker Reslov. He went up the racetrack and it looked like there might have been some accidental contact between both of the guys, and Kyle Sieg got Parker Reslov up the track, and Parker went really far up into the outside wall. Then he heard the radio communication, and Kyle Sieg went on to blame Parker Reslov for that, saying that's what happens when you crowd me down the racetrack. Now, Parker Reslov was not very happy with those comments. He showed a lot of displeasure, especially on X, basically saying, I guess it runs in the family. It's certainly interesting that two guys have generally been running in the middle pack all season long. I will say Parker Reslov's been pretty good with this team this year, just having a lot of bad luck. But it's kind of funny seeing two guys in the middle of the pack, for that matter, who are never major factors for the win, getting into beasts like this. But this, you have this from time to time where drivers that are never factors for the win, for example, they do get into beasts like this. But I think it's certainly interesting considering Parker Reslov actually drove for this organization not that long ago. I think it was back in 2022. He drove for the RSS Racing organization. And I got to be honest, Parker Reslov did much better than Kyle Sieg. I think Kyle's a talented driver, but I think Parker Reslov is generally a more talented driver than Kyle Sieg is. And I think that these two are going to be racing a lot over the next couple of years because I do expect Parker to stick around with teams like Alpha Prime Racing in the not-so-distant future. Nonetheless, I think this beef is certainly interesting. I think there's some interesting stuff to come out of something like this, and I don't think it'll be the last time we'll be hearing beef between these two, considering I think both are going to be running in that same area and are probably going to be racing against each other for good finishes going forward, in my honest opinion. I think there's more going to come from this not too far down the road. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about AJ Allmendinger. Now, I didn't get a chance to really talk about this on the channel, but AJ Allmendinger, before the NASCAR Cup Series race happened earlier tonight at National Super Speedway, Allmendinger was handed a pretty big penalty because apparently the team had made an adjustment to the splitter of the car. Because of this, they basically got sent to the garage and they had to basically have a NASCAR official watch over them to make sure they reapplied the adjustment and get rid of what they had done to the splitter. The engineer for the team, I believe the car chief, Jared Antley, actually had his hard card confiscated and was basically removed effective immediately from the garage. So they did something. You don't have your hard car removed unless NASCAR felt like he did something really, really serious and really, really bad. Allmendinger did have to serve a pass-through penalty earlier tonight. He did recover to finish inside the top 20. He had to do a stop and go as well. Now, there are potentially more penalties coming for the team. I wouldn't be surprised if it's like an L1 penalty because if you mess with any certain parts of the next-gen car, chances are you're probably going to get a major, major penalty. So I would have to think you're going to see some sort of penalty coming for AJ Allmendinger before the end of the week. There's no cars going to the R&D center, so I'd have to think if we hear anything this week on that front, the penalty will end up coming. But I think it is certainly interesting that this team, especially after getting their way back in the playoffs, they're doing stuff like this and messing with the next-gen car. I just don't understand, as a team that's in the playoff bubble right now, and I get you want to have innovation, I think that's fine and understandable, but I just don't understand why you want to basically put yourself in a deeper hole when you have the chance and opportunity to go out there and compete. It doesn't make sense to me. I think it was a bad decision on their front, and now there's a very good chance more penalties are coming for this program and team pretty soon because they made a dumb decision to mess with the car. You can get in big trouble, and I get we want innovation, but at the same token, same time, you mess with these cars, you're probably going to get in a lot of trouble, and I think that was a bad mistake and a really bad judgment call for the team to mess with that. I think it was a bad decision to mess with that part on the next-gen car. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Larson. Now, we do have a couple Kyle Larson stories to talk about today on the channel, one revolving around a double in Indianapolis. But let's talk about the supercar rumor surrounding Kyle Larson. So Kyle Larson, according to Kelly Crandall, who of course now works for ESPN as well, Kyle Larson says that he is in talks to run a supercar race in Australia at some point at the end of this year, going into 2026. He says currently at the moment he is only in preliminary talks on this front currently at the moment, but talks are definitely picking up on this front right now. There's been a lot of rumors and speculation that there's a couple guys from the NASCAR world who could have the opportunity and a chance to go race in supercars. We have seen a lot of supercar crossover and NASCAR crossover in recent years. Obviously, think about Will Brown, who's going to run for Kaulig Racing at Chicago in about a month from now. You've got Brock Feeney, who's heavily rumored to be coming over and racing a couple races in the Xfinity Series with Kaulig Racing. And you think about other drivers like Cam Waters. We think Cam Waters is going to drive for RFK or Rick Ware Racing. And then Jack Perkins is going to drive at Portland at the end of this year in the Xfinity Series in late August. I think this crossover is a really huge deal, and I get that people aren't the biggest fans of it, but I think if you want your sports to survive long term, you got to have at least a little bit of crossover. So I think this is a really, really big win and a pretty big deal itself if Larson does get the chance and opportunity to run in supercars. Is he going to immediately win? Probably not, if we're going to be honest. I don't expect Larson to go out there and be a lot of drivers who have a lot of experience who consistently race on a week-by-week basis in the series and have a lot of success. But if Larson was to go out there and run inside the top 10 and contend for a top 10, that would be a major and really, really big deal. So I hope we do see Larson do this because, again, I think if Larson gets that chance and opportunity to run some supercar stuff at the end of the year for like Erebus, for example, or AAA Engineering, which is the thing that Kyle Busch was going to be driving for, I think that'd be a big deal. It'd be with Chevrolet, it'd be one of the Chevrolet top organizations. We'll have to wait and see if something like this happens. But it does sound like something like this might be happening down the road, which could be really cool if it does happen, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Carson Hocevar versus Ricky Stenhouse Jr. Now, if you watched the NASCAR Cup Series race in National Super Speedway earlier today, you saw the stuff that happened between Carson Hocevar and Ricky Stenhouse Jr. So Ricky Stenhouse Jr., who at the time is actually holding on to a playoff spot currently at the moment, in the early stages of stage number 2, Stenhouse is running inside the top 20, same with Carson Hocevar as well. And going into turn number 3, there will be some contact between both of the drivers where Stenhouse came down the track and Hocevar had a huge run on Stenhouse and just plowed right into the back of him, and Stenhouse would go up in the outside wall really hard, and his night would come to an end because he had a ton of damage. Now, Carson Hocevar basically didn't say anything until after the race. He felt like he was not at fault for the incident that happened on the track. Meanwhile, Ricky Stenhouse Jr., justifiably so, was not happy about the incident that happened on track, and he says he is planning to talk to Carson Hocevar. He wasn't going to talk to him until after the race had concluded. He wasn't going to fight him like what happened last year at North Wilkesboro, but he's definitely planning to have a talking conversation to Carson Hocevar. Now, this is despite the fact, in my opinion, that I have to put a lot of blame on Hocevar for this, because there's been a lot of times this year where Carson Hocevar has kind of driven a little bit over-aggressive, but that over-aggression has also led to a lot of success, especially as of recently. I mean, Carson Hocevar just picked up his best finish tied his best finish in his NASCAR Cup career by finishing second, of course, at this weekend's race in Nashville. And I think Hocevar has put together some really good performances in 2025. But there's also that over-aggressiveness that we have seen from Carson Hocevar on a week-by-week basis, and sometimes it can lead to a lot of drama and a lot of trouble for the teams that he gets involved in. He's got a lot of drivers that haven't been very, very happy with him. That's been one of my issues I've had with Carson Hocevar. But I also don't hate the aggression in a sense too, and I like seeing the aggression from Carson. And Carson said recently that he's not planning to change to make any driver happy. And I respect that. Stand on your business, stand on your ground. If you want to be aggressive, be an aggressive driver. But I also think at the same time, at some point you're going to make someone upset and they're going to get back at you. And I think that Carson will have to accept that and I think he knows he'll have to accept that too, but if he's consistent about it and not complaining about getting wrecked in the future, that's perfectly fine, because Ricky Stenhouse Jr. is not someone that you really want to mess with. That guy is always had a lot of fights. We saw what happened with Kyle Busch in North Wilkesboro. You probably don't want to mess with Ricky Stenhouse Jr. because he might have his dad come and help him in these fights, and I think he probably should learn from that going forward. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about horsepower. Now, there's been a lot of talk and conversation in the last couple weeks about potential increase in horsepower in NASCAR competition by the end of this year, going up to around 750 horsepower. And a lot of drivers have kind of talked about this in the last week or so. Joe Logano was one of the drivers that was asked by the media, and he kind of said that he doesn't really think unless we go up really heavily on the increase of horsepower and just go up to 750, he doesn't think the racing is going to get significantly better. If we go up to 900 to 950 horsepower, he thinks the racing will get significantly better. Bubba Wallace had a much different approach to this. He says that basically Kevin Harvick says on his podcast and says on the broadcast with Fox, he says he wants to see the tires burned off. Bubba says if we add more horsepower to these cars, it will show a lot more skill. Christopher had a much more analytical approach to this by saying that if we add more horsepower, if we go up like 70 or 75, it's probably not going to be perfect. But he also says that you're probably going to have better racing in general, and the cars that are faster will be able to pass the cars that are slower in front of them. A lot of these drivers I agree with. Now, Michael McDowell did say that he doesn't think it would actually improve unless you go astronomically better, which I do think he's speaking a little bit of truth to that. But I do think that adding horsepower to the next-gen car, regardless, I think going up 100 to 150, I think it's going to create a little bit better racing, but I don't think it's going to set the world on fire. If you go up to 900 or 950 horsepower, that's when I think the significant changes is going to happen. Now, do I think that if we go up to 750, 800, the racing will get better? A little bit. I think the racing will actually improve at least slightly. I don't think it's going to set the world on fire, but I think the racing will be better on the short tracks. And NASCAR is talking about adding it at this particular moment for the short tracks at this time. And I think that's where we need to start with. And I think all tracks in general might need something like this. We saw some of those issues in the Cup race and National. Now, to be fair, all three races this weekend were not barn burners by any stretch of the imagination. And maybe we need to see changes to the track itself for the racing to get better. I'm not entirely sure. But I do think for the racing to get better, because we've had issues with it, the main thing I've been saying is we need more horsepower to this car. I think more horsepower is going to make the racing generally better, and I think we'll see better stuff. I think there's still some aero stuff. Well, we've done a lot of aero stuff, but we need to start doing other things, and I think adding horsepower will be a good way to start, and I think it's one of the best ways we can start to try to get the racing at least a little bit better. So the sooner we can get the racing better, I think it's the better is going to be for everybody. I hope these changes can be made soon, can happen really soon, and we can get some better racing at these tracks going forward in the not-so-distant future, and in my honest opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Larson. Now, Kyle Larson, of course, attempted to complete the double this past week at the Indy 500 and the Coca-Cola 600. And unfortunately for Kyle Larson this week, did not go very smoothly and it did not go well for him. And there was some stuff that happened on social media that kind of surfaced around Kyle Larson. Now, there was some radio communication that surfaced where Tyler Mon, not Kyle Larson, was the one that basically said the driver that was involved in the incident that would eventually be revealed as Scott McLaughlin. Someone on the radio, that being Tyler Mon, was calling somebody an effing idiot. Now, Kyle Larson did also go by as well and was a little bit sarcastic and gave a thumbs up gesture to Scott McLaughlin. Now, Kyle Larson was asked these questions by the media, and he says that he feels bad for the gesture at Scott McLaughlin. He didn't even realize at the time when the crash had happened, he didn't even realize at the time it was Scott McLaughlin who was the one who ended up crashing. And he apologized very, very quickly and felt bad not much after. He felt like he was very, very frustrated about what had happened with the 45-minute delay. And he also said that someone crashing in the warm-up made him really upset about that. And again, Scott McLaughlin even knows that Larson apologized to him, so I think people saying Larson's a bad person overall for giving a thumbs up, it wasn't the smartest thing to do, and Larson regrets that. Larson, I understand his frustration a little bit, and I guess we find out it was sarcastic, but I think we all have to remember, too, that everyone is human and we make mistakes, and I think for Larson, he had a right to be a little bit frustrated with certain situations. I mean, again, he didn't know it was Scott McLaughlin who was the one that crashed, right? But I think what we have to understand is Larson was just frustrated with the whole entire situation. The rain wasn't in the forecast the whole entire week. And all of a sudden, rain shows up out of left field that wasn't in the forecast, and it screws Larson. I mean, now Tony Stewart's the only guy that's ever completed a double at this point with this situation. I mean, Kurt Busch hasn't completed it. John Andretti and Robbie Gordon didn't complete it either. Speaking of that, he was asked about questions about doing the double. Larson said as of right now that he would like to run the Indy 500 again, but as of right now, he is not planning to do the double. And he says the logistics are a big reason for that. He says not because of the waiver rule, which I will say I think the waiver rule did play a major role in him not doing the double again going forward, because I think that if the waiver rule wasn't there, I think you might see Larson down the road do it again. But I think Larson doing the Indy 500 absolutely needs to happen. Larson, if you give him more time to dedicate and not focus on NASCAR and focus on a championship there, I do think Larson actually would do a lot better. But But I think for Larson, again, I think his frustration, well, I think the thumbs up was probably a little bit unnecessary, and I think he probably regrets doing that. I know Larson definitely didn't want to give the thumbs up to him to make him really, really upset. I know Larson, like Scott McLaughlin, they're both really good race car drivers, and I think it's a shame that something like this kind of overshadowed the whole entire event. And I don't think Larson wanted to put him down in any way, shape, or form on that front. Again, the main thing is Larson was upset about how everything went. It was a very frustrating situation overall, and I think that's why Kyle Larson was upset. He wasn't merely mad at Scott McLaughlin, he was more frustrated at the situation because it put him more at a very detrimental position, especially when it came to something like that where he had to try to do the double and didn't get the chance and opportunity to do that. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Austin Cindric. Now, there's been a lot of talk and conversation on social media over the course of the last couple of weeks with Austin Cindric's future at Team Penske. Now, many people have reiterated that Austin Cindric is going to be back with Team Penske for 2026, but we don't exactly know how long the contract is for Austin Cindric at Team Penske. That was, of course, until this past week. Now, Bob Pockrass got the chance and opportunity to talk to Roger Penske about the situation. And Roger reiterated in a post that Bob put up on Saturday by basically saying that Austin Cindric does have a contract this year and does have a contract through next year. So 2026 is going to be a contract year for Austin Cindric at Team Penske. But Roger basically did reiterate and say that we shouldn't be focusing on Austin Cindric's right at the moment. We should be focusing on Austin Cindric and being very competitive. And I do have to agree with Roger Penske to an extent. I do think a lot of people talk about this because obviously Tim Cindric, Ron Brzuski, and Kyle Moyer, the three big names in the Penske group for the last 10 and many years they've been with the team. Many people thought because of Tim Cindric that Austin Cindric's future was going to be in question. And while I think that some of those are kind of understood by a lot of fans, Austin Cindric, in my opinion, has been there for quite some time. Now, I do think that him having Cindric in his last name definitely helped him get the ride, but I will say this, winning the Daytona 500 in 2022, Roger Penske doesn't forget things like that. He got Team Penske's only third in Daytona 500 victory, and he's picked up wins with Penske, and in my opinion, look at Austin Cindric, he has improved as a race car driver. The pace and speed has gotten a lot better for the program, and I think he's been doing a much better job. I think Penske in general, they have shown a lot more speed. I mean, Cindric, of course, got the win at Talladega earlier this year. Ryan Blaney got a win earlier tonight at Nashville, ran very well in the race. And then, of course, Joey Logano picked up a win at Texas Motor Speedway. And if you want to add Josh Berry as a fourth Penske car in a sense, he got the win. I just think right now moving on from Cindric doesn't make sense. The only thing maybe you could do is maybe do a driver swap down the road, maybe with Josh Berry and Austin Cindric. Someone mentioned that as a possibility, but I think Cindric has earned the ride in the 2 car recently. Again, would have said this a few years ago. I would have said replace Austin Cindric with Josh Berry or do the driver swap there. But right now, in my personal opinion, I think Austin Cindric has done good enough in that car to stick around in that car. I think it would not make any sense for him to lose that seat currently at the moment. Cindric is a talented driver. He can put up good numbers. He's been doing a good job this season. He's getting better as a race car driver, and as the older he gets, the better of a race car driver he will truly become. So I think Cindric deserved and has earned the right to stick around in that seat for 2026 and also 2027 as well. And I think even long term in all honesty. And I think as he gets closer to his teammates, which he's been a lot closer, I think he's only going to get better as a race car driver. And I think he'll continue to improve as a race car driver with this team. In my honest opinion, I think he's earned the right to stay for at least the foreseeable future. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Daniel Dye. Now, we did a video covering the story on the channel on Saturday late. Even if you haven't checked that out, I suggest going to check it out. But it was announced late Saturday night that Daniel Dye has been disqualified from the NASCAR Xfinity Series race at Nashville Super Speedway. After initially crossing the finish line in 9th place and scoring what is like his 3rd or 4th top 10 of the season, he was disqualified from the event. Now, why was Daniel Dye disqualified from the NASCAR Xfinity Series race at Nashville Super Speedway? Well, the big reason was because he was I think either too low or too high in the rear of the car, and there was not enough height in the car or too much height in the car, and that's why he got disqualified. This moves up drivers like I believe Corey Day up to 10th or 11th. I believe Carson Clough moves up to 8th or 9th in the event, and a couple guys like that crashed out like William Sawalich and Christian Eckes, they move up a position or two on the leaderboard. Connor Zilch also did get a penalty for having 2 loose lug nuts on the car. Had he had one more loose lug nut on that car, he would have been disqualified. Because he had two, though, he's not disqualified. But Marty Lindley, the crew chief of the number 88 team, he basically will be suspended for the upcoming race at Mexico, which could be very significant considering Connor Zilisch is the favorite going into that race. Even though there's some good Cup guys, they're going to be running that event more than likely. Now, it's so crazy how many disqualifications we've had so far this year. Also, Justin Allgaier did pass post-race inspection, by the way. But there have been so many disqualifications in NASCAR competition in 2025. You think about the beginning of the year. Parker Kligerman, the guy who won the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series race at Daytona, he got disqualified for, I believe, rear issues. You think about earlier this year, Jesse Love, the guy who originally won the Xfinity Series race. Guess what? He got disqualified from the NASCAR Xfinity race at Rockingham. They appealed it and lost, and Sammy Smith got the win. Sammy Smith, speaking of which, got disqualified at Charlotte. He basically had a penalty there. Lane Riggs got penalized at Kansas, and who finished second for, I think, something in the rear, too much weight in the car. Eric Jones, same thing. Last year, Alex Bowman. Last year, Justin Haley. Last year, other drivers in the Cup Series, Xfinity Series, and Truck Series. I mean, Corey Heim got disqualified for lug nuts last year. And then a few years ago, you had Denny Hamlin and Kyle Busch. They both got disqualified, and the win went to Chase Elliott at Pocono. We have seen so many disqualifications. Oh, and I almost forgot the double disqualification at Talladega for Ryan Preece and Joey Logano. We have seen so many disqualifications in 2025, and it's absolutely wild. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this is a record for disqualifications in NASCAR competition. There's been so many of them this year, and we just continue seeing them on a week-by-week basis. And I'm just not sure what can be done at this point on that front. I just wish we could go 1 week without having a disqualification. We've had 3 of the last 4 weeks. We've had like 10 of them this year. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this is the record for most disqualifications in a season in all 3 series combined. And I don't think this is the last time we're going to be talking about them. I wouldn't be surprised or shocked with Michigan being an aero-sensitive track. Maybe we see disqualification in the Truck Series because Xfinity isn't racing this weekend, but maybe we see disqualification in trucks or maybe even the Cup Series. Who knows at this point? At least tonight, the Cup Tech got through with no major issues and no major problems, but it's crazy how many disqualifications we've had so far this year and how many drivers have gotten qualified and have had issues with tech in the sport. Absolutely wild and crazy stuff. Another disqualification happens, which is wild and crazy, and more of those are coming, it seems like, on a week-by-week basis, and crazy stuff continues to happen. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the first of 2 major stories in today's episode as we're talking about Cleetus McFarland. As it was shockingly reported by Adam Stern early tonight that Cleetus McFarland could be in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series on a full-time basis in 2026. According to Adam Stern, it sounds like there is prospective manufacturer, that of course being Dodge and the Ram brand, who could be getting involved with Cleetus McFarland for the 2026 season. Reading the article that Adam Stern did report, he is one of the names that is mentioned as a possibility for this program. There's been multiple sources where 4 sources have told him in the industry that work very closely with the Stellantis program, and documents that have surfaced as well have indicated that Cleetus McFarland may be the driver for this team and program. Now, obviously, we have heard a lot of speculation and rumors that Dodge and the Ram brand might be coming back to NASCAR as early as the 2026 season. We have not had that official announcement at the time. I had heard through the grapevine that announcement could be happening at some point this summer, so maybe in the next couple weeks we're going to have an announcement on this front. Now, Cleetus McFarland, let's talk about him for a second. Cleetus has not made a start in NASCAR Cup, Xfinity, or Truck competition. He has, however, made starts in ARCA. 3 starts, as a matter of fact. He ran the race at Daytona, qualified decently, was running inside the top 10, top 15 early in the race, spun out early but recovered, and then got into an incident with Amber Balkan after she had a mechanical failure in the event. Then he, of course, ran at Talladega, had one cylinder that was not working on the car, and he still recovered to finish inside the top 10 and 9th place. And then he had one of his better runs at Charlotte early in the event, ran top 7, top 10 most of the event. Then he had a really, really bad restart, caused, unfortunately, some issues on the racetrack, and a lot of guys in their cars got collected in the incident after one of the worst restarts we've seen, which I think that Greg Zipadelli made a dumb decision to leave him out on that front. I think that might have been a YouTube decision more than anything else to try to keep him out there. Now, obviously, Dodge and Cleetus McFarland would make a lot of sense for the Ram brand. Now, what team could it be? Could it be a new team that Dodge is cooking up for next year? It is certainly possible. Could it be the rumor of GMS Racing coming back? we have heard some rumors and speculation that GMS Racing may have a NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series program once again in 2026. Now, Mike Beam has not made a comment on this yet, and I know that Spencer Gallagher has kind of denied these rumors, but when he's putting a smile out there, that tells me there's a lot of truth to these rumors about it. And Cleetus being part of the GMS Racing group and the Dodge group would definitely be very American and certainly interesting. Now, here's my thoughts on Cleetus McFarland also going full-time trucks if this was to happen. I got to be honest, right? I don't want to see Cleetus McFarland jump completely full-time as of this moment in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series until he at least makes a start or two in truck competition. I know he's talked about making some national touring starts at some point this year, but I think if he just jumps fully straight in there without any experience in NASCAR truck competition, it really could hurt him going into next year. I think making a start or two by the end of this year, which we could see him make a start in Xfinity truck competition by the end of the year. We also know he's going to be running a Bristol Motor Speedway for Rhett Jones Racing. I think that would certainly be very, very interesting if that could happen. But if you just jump him up full-time with only 3 races of ARCA experience, I worry very quickly that Cleetus is going to struggle. And I don't want that for Cleetus McFarland. I think Cleetus is really important for the sport. He's really good for the sport. And if he is in the truck series full-time next year as a driver, I think you are going to see a growth in the popularity of the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series. But I think that right now being a full-time driver should not be the goal. I know the long-term goal is for Cleetus to get to run the Daytona 500. And I think that'd be really awesome if he does get that chance to run the Daytona 500. But the most important thing is getting experience. I think he can't just have only 3 or 4 starts in ARCA and jump straight up in running truck series car truck at the moment. I think he's done a really solid job with what he's done so far. He's brought a lot of numbers in for ARCA, especially, and a lot of people that normally wouldn't tune into ARCA in the first place are tuning into ARCA, and I think that he's a big part and a major reason for that. I just don't want to see him get into the truck series on a full-time basis next year and struggle, and a lot of people kind of go after him. I want to see him make a few starts this year and maybe have like a part-time opportunity or take like an ownership stake in the program and maybe make a few starts. Now, 2027, you want to be a full-time driver after getting starts in truck competition. I think that's one thing. I just think he needs to have a little bit of time to kind of get his skills developed in NASCAR competition before he is full-time. But it sounds very likely that there is a good chance of possibly we could see him full-time next year. There's definitely a chance anything's possible at this particular moment in point. We'll see what happens with Cleetus. But again, I don't want to see him full-time in truck competition next year, but I'd love to see him making some starts in NASCAR. I think it's important if it happens. I really hope we do get to see the chance and opportunity for Cleetus to make some starts at some point in truck competition. If he goes full-time, it's interesting. It sounds like there's definitely a possibility of something like that happening for Cleetus McFarland. We'll see if it does end up happening. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the final major story of today's episode as we're talking about NASCAR silly season. Now, every single year, Jordan Bianchi releases an article, it seems like at the beginning of the year or in the middle portion of the year, talk about what he's heard in regards to NASCAR silly season for 2025 going into 2026. Now, according to a lot of what he has heard and what he hears behind the scenes, it sounds like NASCAR silly season currently at the moment is not going to be as crazy as it's been in recent years. He has heard from some industry executives there might be some crickets behind the scenes and not a lot of major movement is expected. But the big team to watch for, according to him, in this silly season is mainly going to be Trackhouse Racing. Now, it is noted that Ross Chastain does have a pretty long-term contract with the Trackhouse Racing team, and Ross Chastain will not be going anywhere anytime soon. The big question is going to be on the final 2 rides for the program, and there's 3 drivers that could be in those cars. You have Daniel Suarez, who drives the 99 car for Trackhouse Racing. You have Shane Van Gisbergen in the 88 car for Trackhouse, and you have Connor Zilch, who's currently full-time in the NASCAR Xfinity Series currently at the moment. All 3 drivers are fighting for 2 seats currently at this particular moment. Now, Shane Van Gisbergen, in my understanding, does have a couple-year contract with the organization, so he's probably not going anywhere, at least from what some are saying, but he could also be on the hot seat depending on performance from Shane Van Gisbergen on the ovals, and if he doesn't contend on the road courses going forward. Meanwhile, Daniel Suarez is struggling in the NASCAR Cup Series this season so far and is sitting 30th in the points, even though SVG has definitely been worse on ovals a lot of this year till recently than Daniel Suarez. There's also some talk that Connor Zilch could return to the NASCAR Xfinity Series in 2026. Some do think it could be a status quo season, and we could see him stick down there and return. I think the big question at this moment right now, it comes down between what happens with that number 99 card. Does Daniel Suarez stay in the seat next year, or does Connor Zilisch come in? As much as people want to talk about SVG, and yes, I know Shane Van Gisbergen has not been very good on the ovals at this time, but he's starting to figure it out. Until the end of the race, he was running in the top 20 at Nashville. He got a top 15 in the Coast 600. He's catching Daniel Suarez, and in fact, he's out-qualifying Daniel Suarez now on ovals on a week-by-week basis. I think SVG is going to get ovals figured out very quickly, and he's starting to pick up the speed as the season goes on. Daniel Suarez, meanwhile, he showed good speed and flashes early in the year, but he's starting to fall off the cliff, and he's sitting 30th in the points. Tonight was a solid run for Suarez, I'll give you that, but generally in recent weeks, it's been a struggle for the 99 team. There's also a chance to keep Zilisch and Xfinity, and I think that would be the best decision to go with maybe at this moment, but I also think we could see Zilisch in the Cup Series next year. If Connor Zilisch does move up to the NASCAR Cup Series next season and takes over the 99, for example, I think Suarez goes to Collier and replaces Ty Dillon. I don't see Suarez leaving Cup. I think Suarez is good, but you got to think about the sponsors too. So I think Trackhouse does have a difficult position. It would make sense to keep Suarez in the NASCAR Xfinity Series going into the season, but I think there's also a chance we might see him move up. We'll just have to kind of wait and see on that front what happens with this organization going into next year. Moving on, let's talk about Denny Hamlin. According to the article, Denny Hamlin is in a contract year with Joe Gibbs Racing, according to the reports. But Denny Hamlin is expected to sign an extension with JGR at least for a year or two, and I think this is the most logical thing you can do. Denny Hamlin's been really good with Joe Gibbs Racing this year. He just picked up a top 5 at Nashville. This 11 team has a lot of speed right now. Denny Hamlin has a really good shot to get that first championship this year, so I think there's definitely a chance Hamlin could win the title. I think he will likely stay with JGR. Next, AJ Allmendinger. We've talked about this a couple times, but Allmendinger's contract with Cog, we will stay in Cup next year. It's been confirmed by Chris Rice. Everyone has kind of confirmed it. Some have been trying to calm everybody and say, oh, we've already known this at this point, but he does have a contract for, to my understanding, through the end of the decade, it sounds like, so he's not going anywhere anytime soon. The next big hurdle we got to talk about is 2311 Racing. Corey Heim is, of course, under development contract with 2311, but many in the industry feel like that he should be in the NASCAR Cup Series right now, and I agree 100%. The problem is, according to the article, Tyler Reddick, Bubba Wallace, and Riley Herbst are all under contract through next season, especially Bubba Wallace, who signed a multi-year deal with this program, and Riley Herbst's family is bringing that charter in from Suarez Racing. If you want my personal opinion, I move Riley Herbst out of that seat and put Corey Heim in the car. But it sounds like 2027 is going to be the earliest. It blows my mind that this guy is not in a NASCAR Cup Series car right now. Corey Heim is way too good to be racing in trucks full time. He's been the guy to be in trucks every week on a week-by-week basis, and the fact he's not in a full-time Cup car, it blows my mind. It honestly pisses me off, too, because he's way too good to be in a lower series, and he should be in that 35 car. Riley Herbst has been an afterthought all season long, and I don't understand why he needs to be in that ride over Corey Heim. Oh, it's because of funding. But if Safelite could step up and some of those other companies could step up and sponsor Corey, can you please put him in that car? That'd be great. And it sounds like, according to the article, they're not moving him over to Legacy, depending on what happens with that lawsuit. And we're still kind of don't even know what's going to happen with the main lawsuit between 2311 and Front Row. Are they going to have their charters? Because we don't even know what the decision is from the judge currently at the moment. So we'll have to kind of wait and see what happens in regards to that and what happens with 2311. But I think this is definitely a big one to watch out for to see what happens. Heim, it sounds like Heim, though, will be back in trucks or may go to Xfinity. If Sam Hunt Racing and 2311 can work together very well, maybe we see Corey Heim in the full-time Xfinity ride with Sam Hunt Racing. I think that's the most logical way you could go to get him out of Truck Series in a full-time basis. And finally, some miscellaneous notes on some drivers who could play a role in silly season. Eric Almirola, Corey LaJoie, Jesse Love, Sam Mayer, and Chandler Smith. Chandler Smith, of course, full-time in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series. There were rumors last year that he was maybe going to be full-time in Cup this year. There was even talk early in the year, or at the end of last year, that he might drive for Richard Childress Racing. If he does go Cup racing in any way, shape, or form, it will be with Ford more than likely. I'd have to think it'd be a Front Row. That's only if the drivers would have to lose their seat with the charter stuff going on. But keep an eye on Chandler Smith because he could be a free agent and one to watch out for. Sam Mayer, interesting. If Brad Keselowski was to retire at the end of this season, or if Rick Ware needs to bring someone in to replace, quote, Cody Ware, I put Sam Mayer in that seat because I think Sam Mayer is a way better driver than Cody Ware. So I think that's the big one to watch out for there on the Ford camp. Moving on, Jesse Love. Jesse Love's name continues to get mentioned as a possible driver for the Cup Series next year. He, of course, has made select starts in NASCAR Cup competition. If we see RCR find a way to get a third charter going into next season, I would think Jesse Love could definitely be a big factor for a Cup ride if they find a way somehow to get a third charter. Next, Corey LaJoie. Corey LaJoie is probably going to be a factor every year on silly season, as Corey LaJoie could potentially be in the NASCAR Cup Series full-time again. If they could find a sponsorship and funding, which he's got some funding with him, maybe we see him on a full-time basis in Cup, who knows. And finally, the one is surprising of Eric Almirola. Eric Almirola's name is being mentioned here. He, of course, is working very closely with Joe Gibbs Racing right now at this moment, and I think it'd be really interesting if they got him into a NASCAR Cup Series ride once again. I think it would have to be maybe if Denny Hamlin retires out of left field and Almirola wants to be full-time, but I think being full-time Xfinity is more likely option at this point, though if he goes Cup racing part-time, that'd be certainly interesting, but it sounds like his name is one to watch out for in the silly season, and I'd also be looking for other guys like Will Brown and Brock Feeney too, who could be factors. Now, again, looking at the article, there were some things that were mentioned, like Dodge, for example, what teams are going to switch manufacturers if they come in. But I think the big thing to be looking for if you're a fan of the sport is look to see what happens with Trackhouse Racing and see what drivers and what teams could make moves in regards to that part of the silly season for 2025. We'll find out about some of this stuff in the not-so-distant future and see what Justin Marks' decision is going to be. So, that is going to be today's Lawn NASCAR News and Motorsports News episode. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, turn notifications on so if I win a video, it does go live on my channel. Follow me on Facebook and Instagram and support me on Patreon as well. Let's go some more of that and comment your thoughts below on today's video. What do you think Trackhouse Racing is going to do with their decision for next year? Let me your thoughts in the comments below. And what are your thoughts about Cleetus McFarland potentially being in the Truck Series next year with Ram? Let me your thoughts in the comments below. If any major news breaks later today, we'll discuss it live on the channel. If not, the next time you're going to see me is tomorrow. We're going to have the entry list for the NASCAR Cup race at Michigan. And then, of course, we might do the truck picks. We'll have to wait and see. Then on Thursday, we're going to have Cup race picks for the Firekeepers Casino 400. And we'll also have some other content like the paint scheme video. And we'll also have some other content dropping this week. Haley Deegan, Shaman Gisberg, Cards, Scribbush, Cobblish, Bubba Walsh, Ross Chastain, Connor Zillis, Junior Motorsports, Sheldon Creed, Sam Mayer, Frankie Muniz, Donald Trump, KSI, Logan Paul, Kyle Busch, all the good stuff we'll be talking about on the channel in the coming days and weeks. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode, and I'll see you guys next time for more great, awesome NASCAR content, other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, buddy.